Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island, story 16. Now, I told you a little bit about how I moved in Bed-Stuy at an early age, but this book is about Marlboro and Coney Island, so let me get back to it. Somewhere around the age of 14 or 15 is when this next altercation took place, and it gave me a different perspective on both those that lived in Marlboro and Coney Island. One summer night, there was a party at the Marlboro Community Center on the other side of the projects. When I got over to the other side of the P's, I immediately noticed a very huge crowd. It's a bunch of hard-looking young and older boys that I'd never seen before in life. Then I started seeing a bunch of young girls that I'd never seen before neither. Within that moment, I spotted Flip, and it came to me that they were from Coney Island, and they were everywhere. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say at least 100 strong. It appeared to be more adolescents from CI in the area than from Marlboro this night. Now listen closely, as two major events happened this night, unforgettable to anyone that was out there this night. The first event I truly don't even know how to describe. The tension in the air was thicker than two Snickers. At that point in life, it was the biggest gathering I'd ever seen outside of Marlboro in one area, and there was no doubt in my mind that there were plenty of guns amongst the crowd. But as everyone stood around, a young and fearless kid appeared from a distance. He would eventually become one of my closest friends, a young no-nonsense kid named Gerald Cardwell. Gerald was a tall, pretty, light-skinned dude with 3 brothers around his age. They used to live on my side in Building 3, but moved to Queens for some time. Later, they would return to an apartment in Building 25, which is on the other side. Gerald, aka G Money, was every bit of a gangster, although he took a heavy L that night. No one noticed when he spun out of the crowd and disappeared to his crib, but everyone noticed him returning with a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun. He is stepping quickly from Building 25, where he lived at the time. Now there's a long path from where the crowd was milling around about in Building 25. It's dark down around Building 25, but when my homie stepped out of the darkness into the light, everyone saw him coming.
Hey yo, check out dude with the strap.
Someone in the crowd yelled. Everyone's head turned in the direction of my homie. He's coming up the path with the sawed-off shotgun in his right hand. All eyes are on him, and the tension grew. Once he gets closer, something crazy and shocking transpired. Now when I tell you that although this shit disturbed me, witnessed some real gangster, it also put 2 young boys from CI on my radar. Now check this out. Someone from CI yells,
Yo, the police coming, the police coming. Drop that shit, homie.
and my homie did that. Homie panicked and quickly tossed the 12 gauge into the grass next to a building. Then about 5 young boys from CI rushed toward the shotgun. One of them scoops it up, and they all run into the nearest building, Building 16. A few minutes later, they emerge, walking normal. There was no way to tell who had the strap. The move stunned me, and everyone had the lost puppy face. It was crazy, but gangster as can be. 2 dudes came out of the building, whose faces became engraved in my head. I later found out that one of them was named Breeze, and the other young gangster was Shalik. The move they pulled traumatized me. It disturbed me so bad that I broke out into tears, mostly because the older cats that lived in Marlboro just watched as if they were stuck. At this time, Heath, who I had told about the party, is pulling up on me. He had just got off the N train when he ran into me. Heath was a Bed-Stuy cat and around 16 years old at the time, so I knew he was strapped. I felt safe, but still agitated and wanted to do something. Since he didn't know who was from Coney Island or Marlboro, he passes me the small black revolver. The dudes that lived in Marlboro are standing around like zombies. My dude G looked hurt, and I felt his pain. At some point, it felt like an invasion to me. Gunplay wasn't heavy in my life at the time, but I was prepared to defend the hood. Although everything happened quickly, it appeared to be moving in slow motion. Within seconds, shots popped off. Major incident number 2. Everyone is scattering, screaming, and looking for cover. I found myself in a nearby building with Heath and a young boy from Marlboro named Artie Ice. This boy, Artie Ice, was always dapper in the hood. He lived on the other side, so we knew each other, but we were not friends. But when he pulled out what looked like a small .25 caliber, I knew we were on the same page. We run up 7 flights of stairs to the roof with intentions on popping shots. By the time we made it to the roof, the last small group of Coney Island dudes are entering the 86th Street N train station. And when we returned back downstairs, received some very bad news. A pretty light-skinned girl from Building 1 that I did some kissing and smooching on a few years earlier had been shot. The next day I found out that a bullet just grazed her head. It was the gossip of the hood for days. And then rumors began to surface that the 10 thieves fired the first shot that brought about the melee. When I heard it was the 10 thieves, the boy Flip name came to mind. Now I'm not saying he shot her because multiple guns popped off, but his name was floating around the chaos. Him and the 10 thieves, their names was sizzling around that event. But in my eyes, it was every young kid from CI whose parents didn't have a tight grip on them. Now that was the first time I ever experienced such a large group from Coney Island coming through Marlboro, but it would not be the last. The young boys from CI treated Marlboro as if we were Charlie Brown. Straight disrespectful. They would eventually continue to come through randomly in groups of 5 to 10 solid, sometimes more, looking for some action. But once I got older, would give them more activity than they could handle. This is the end of story 16, the Don Kawand story. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island. Story 17. Now the tension between Marlboro and Coney Island is at an all-time high. There were plenty of stick-ups and knuckle fights between both hoods. I heard stories of some older cats that lived in Marlboro that went to CI to return the stick-up favor. But it was not as strong a move as when they came to Marlboro. This was during the early and mid-80s. Even though there were guns on the streets, there wasn't a lot of killing going on. But I did witness quite a few situations where an older fella from Marlboro stepped up and put the knuckle game on someone from CI. There were a couple of older brothers from Marlboro that had hands stamped in the history books. Now I'm going to literally put them in the book for life. One of them older fellas that had a knuckle game in Marlboro that truly impressed me early in life was a kid from Building 1. His name was Lover Law. A pretty Ricky kind of fella, mostly because he was a light-skinned dude with waves in his hair. The boy walked with confidence, you know, that Brooklyn swag. The boy got my attention one day when he was involved in a scuffle with a cat from CI. Lover Law was yapping it up with about 7 cats from CI. They were in front of 30 Rock, and I was watching from a distance, being too young to get involved. Lover Law was yapping back and forth with a group of older boys from CI. They had him kind of semi-surrounded, more like a Soul Train line, with Lover Law at one end and the kid he was popping off with at the other end. I'm sure you get what I'm trying to say. Well, anyway, within seconds, him and his kid get to mixing it up. It was a straight-up one-on-one fight, and Lover Law had this dude on his heels. Now pay attention to this G move that I witnessed early. One of the kids from CI was to the right of Lover Law, playing cheerleader for his man. He was gabbing during the entire fight. At some point, Lover Law must have got tired of it. While in the middle of the scuffle, he stepped back and hit this dude that was yapping with a hard left cross. The blow put dude flat on his back. My eyes are wide open at this point. Now my first thought was that they were going to hurt Lover Law. But to my surprise, he snuffed the dude out and then got back to the original fight. And when the fight was over, he walked away unscathed. Love of Law had not only earned my respect that day, but it was obvious that the boys from CI also respected his knuckle game. He also taught me a very valuable lesson that day, and that was that numbers didn't matter. To stand tall no matter what the odds are. He eventually moved somewhere across town, and I'd never see him again, but unfortunately heard of his death years later. But others from Marlboro inspired my willingness to knuckle up. I'm gonna share a few stories about a few of them, but one is legendary. This is the end of story 17, the Don Kawand story. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, subtitled Marlboro and Coney Island, Story 18. I guess you could tell by now, in the 1980s, you had to have a hand game in order to survive in Brooklyn, New York. Now I'm going to get into another brother from Marlboro, whose hands were not only respected in Marlboro, but throughout the NYC prison system. This dude was a beast in the projects and lived in 30 Rock. My man Malik, aka Black Mo. And when I tell you that this brother's hands are certified, you better ask somebody. I've been privileged to observe him in hand-to-hand combat in the projects on several occasions, to which his hand skills were on display. He too, like Love of Law, was not afraid to mix it up with them boys from Coney Island. But one time, he was getting it in with a cat named Chris, aka Original, who also lived in 30 Rock on the 8th floor. I'm mentioning this fight because it was very impressive. Now, Original was no sucker, but had the appearance of one. He had a funny walk, wore glasses, and was not the most fashionable kid in the neighborhood, but the boy will fight anyone. Anyway, they're sparring in front of 30 Rock, and Malik did something that blew the wig off the top of my head. He was already putting the beast down on Original and talking plenty of shit as usual. Malik had jokes, which made his scuffles comical and entertaining. While laughing at the antics, he does a little skip back before pulling off a roundhouse kick that landed directly on the side of Original's face. The bottom of his foot covered Original's ear and the entire side of his face. It was a Bruce Lee kick, and the fight was over. It was the first time I'd ever seen Malik use his foot to put someone out, but it was amazing. Even though I would get real cool with Malik later on in life, it would be his younger brother, someone we all call Life, that I'd eventually get some gangster lessons from. Lessons needed to survive in Brooklyn. But before I get to my homie, I gotta tell you about this older brother from Marlboro, whose hands is legendary. He deserves the utmost respect for his hand game. Unfortunately, I never witnessed him in action, but if you ask anyone from Marlboro who had the nicest hands in the game in the early 80s, they will tell you that it was this boy that everyone called CLR. CLR was a handsome, dark-skinned older brother from Building 1. He had some amateur boxing up under his belt. Therefore, his hand game was something serious. He was much older than I was, but even until today, his name rings bells when it comes to talking about those who had a knuckle game in the 1980s. He's legendary. Now, I'm sure there were some other cats from Marlboro that had a knuckle game, but no one would argue with me about the three that I already named. Well, maybe some that live on the other side of the projects, but they will have to tell you that story in their own books. I'm telling you about my side of the projects, my memories, and who I believe deserve the proper homage. The previous three are certified in my eyes: Love of Law, Malik, and CLR. Unfortunately, in my early years of high school, CLR was murdered. According to the papers, he was found shot dead on a bench somewhere across town. His younger brother Bernard, aka Shake, was in my class at the time when we got the news, and it was a very somber day for everyone. Now, by the time I got to high school, I had a true dislike for those that lived in CI. But after my first year, I'd meet some cool brothers that would change my feelings, and eventually meet two others that would take my gangster and hustling lifestyle to another level. This is the end of story 18, the Don Kawand story. If you know a young boy that like to swing them knuckles, click like, share, and subscribe, cause somebody needs to hear this.